Welcome to Empowered. I'm Elizabeth Naumovski. The talk about mental health is on the rise, and it's become more and more of a conversation amongst us. Mental health is the well-being of our brain, how we think, what we think about, and what we experience. Now, most people will struggle with their mental health at some point in their lifetime. The key is to acknowledge it and get the help that we need. How can we take care of our mental health? What can we do for ourselves, and how can we help others that are struggling? Today I'm joined by Stephanie Jones, facilitator, speaker, author, and founder of Jones Mental Health. Stephanie's knowledge comes from her work, both academic and clinical, and her lived experience as well. She's here to talk about the current state of mental health and where we go from here. Welcome to Empowered, Stephanie. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you for the lovely introduction as well. I'm excited for our conversation.
I'm super excited as well because this is so important. There are so many people that are young, old, in between that are struggling with their mental health issues. So let's just begin. For those who don't know who you are, tell us about yourself.
Yes, so as you mentioned, I've worked in mental health and healthcare for about 8 years, a little bit over, in various capacities: communication, stakeholder engagement. Most recently, my focus has been workplace mental health, as well as student mental health and mental health 101 for employees and leadership as well. I also focused on racialized mental health, so Black, Indigenous, and people of color, and how is that different and how to talk about it and address those issues. I've been very fortunate in my career. I've worked with larger corporations, I've worked with nonprofits, I've been able to work with leadership, so CEOs, as well as senior staff, human resources, as well as all staff and general staff as well. I think one of the most important things, and we'll talk about this more, is my lived experience. So I've had about 2 decades of lived experience with depression and anxiety, and it really inspires me. It kind of drives me to keep going and pushing in the work that I do, as well as it allows me to combine not just my clinical work and education, but my lived experience as well. So having that perspective, I think, really resonates with people.
So Stephanie, what led you to share your story?
Yeah, so funny enough, it was the pandemic. I don't think without the pandemic I would have shared it, actually, honestly. When it had started, I was working in workplace mental health. I was running a national program, and it was extremely busy, and we were responding quite quickly because there was all these new topics, right? Compassion fatigue, isolation, loneliness, health anxiety. There was a lot, and everyone was very, as I'm sure you can recall personally as well, it was a very difficult time. And employers were very distraught. They didn't know how to address a lot of these topics. And things kind of kept escalating when it came to, occurrences such as George Floyd, and what do you do about that? When numbers of suicide rates were going up. Again, this is something else that employers have to address. So, it was a kind of a bizarre experience for me, because when I was providing training and all this great information, and, and some of it was psychoeducation, some of it was more so about the workplace and how to address certain topics and talk about it, etc. There was always a moment at the end of the training where it was kind of silent, and I could either sign off and say goodnight, or, have a good day and finish, or I could disclose. And, after a while, I could see how much people were struggling. And I knew that if I had disclosed and told them, I've been through this, and not only can you make it, but you can also, the things that we're saying and the things that we're teaching, they truly do work. And I found once I started disclosing, the feedback was always very strong, right? If it wasn't from employees or audience directly, it was HR that was coming back and saying, they're very thankful for the disclosure. And I want to emphasize that this was very important as well for myself as a Black woman. When I was working with BIPOC groups, it was very important for me, for them to see my face, right? Because the stigma is even worse, and more so in that community.
And the thing is, for you to disclose so much personal experience of your own, I mean, that you're very brave to do that, because you never know how people are going to accept it, or what they're going to say, how they're going to feel, or how you're going to feel. When we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more with Stephanie Jones. So please don't go away, and we'll discuss more mental health. Welcome back to Empowered. I'm Elizabeth Naumovski, and today's topic is the state of mental health and where to from here. Before we went to break, Stephanie, we're talking about the state of mental health for women across society. Where's that at now?
Yeah, so it's always been a special issue. And I think what we really have to consider here is what happened during the pandemic. I think women have always had that burden, or lack of a better word, of having a 9-to-5 career, supporting the family that way, and also having another job at home, right? You're doing household duties, you're doing a lot of mental work in terms of taking care of the household, children, your partner, etc. And the burnout that can lead to. I think before it was difficult, and I think with the strain and what they went through, what we all went through, it's even more higher numbers of burnout is what I'm seeing, and a lot more, I think, struggling with that, additional labor on top of everything else. I think it's something that's always been around, but it's kind of more imperative right now that we actually talk about it and actually try to make some sort of adjustment or address it in some way.
So how do you think it's manifesting in the lives of women right now? We've suffered through the pandemic. A lot have taken themselves out of the workforce. A lot are still struggling with, taking care of children or whatever. So where are we at now?
Yeah, I think we, as a society, and we need to step back and really think about what resources we're providing. I think, anyone who works in mental health will tell you there's not enough funding. It's just not there, right? And the system isn't well streamed, and there really is no structure. So I think we're at a point right now where we could continue and ignore it, or do what we've been doing, the status quo, or we could actually address it. I think when things like pandemics happen, I notice, in history as well, once they're over, we kind of just move on. Like, as a society, we don't really stop and say, okay, XYZ happened. This is where we are right now. How are we going to move forward and support women? I think too, what we're going to see is and we're already seeing it, higher numbers of depression, higher number of, those with anxiety, as well as burnout, and kind of more extreme results coming. I think right now we're in a special place where I think we could make a difference, but it's if we're actually going to do it or not.
You just mentioned anxiety, and I know that there are a lot of young adults in their 20s, 30s that are extremely anxious. What is going on through our youth's minds right now?
Yeah, so I think for the youth, it's a very special generation. They have a lot of different issues that other generations didn't necessarily have. And I think sometimes when there's this generational battle, like we had it this way, or we had to do this, or it's not that hard, but they're really going through a very difficult time right now in terms of, even just on the global scale, issues like climate change are increasing anxiety levels, the job market, the housing costs, inflation, cost of living, everything is very heightened right now. And I think as a young person, that's a very difficult thing to take on, especially transition years. If you're in high school or university and college, that time, or young adult, that's a lot to carry. And I think a lot of them, they lost key years. Think about it, right? They lost perhaps their junior or senior years in high school, prom, all these things that kind of are rituals and ceremonies that kind of, take us along our journey, as well as things like university, first, second, third year, or fourth. These are huge gaps in their lives that, again, they didn't have. And I think we're not stopping enough to say, okay, what are we going to do about this, instead of just kind of leaving it and let's carry on.
So we've got about a minute before we go to break. So I'd like to begin this next question. What's the current state of workplace mental health?
Yeah, so it's a funny and strange phenomenon that's happening right now. I find a year ago, everyone was on mental health still. We were discussing it. It was top of mind. Right now, it's falling to the back burner. And, there are certain reasons why, but we can discuss that when we return.
Okay, so when we come back, you and I will talk about mental health at work, what we can do to help all of the workers out there, the future of it all, and you know, it, mental health has such a drag on all of us, whether it is depression, whether it's anxiety. We're all going through something. I mean, I can tell you, I lose sleep at night. My brain just keeps twirling all night long, and I worry about things that are near and dear to me and things that I have absolutely no control over. So please don't go away. Stephanie and I will be right back. Welcome back to Empowered. I'm Elizabeth Naumovski. On today's episode, we're discussing the current state of mental health and where do we go from here? So, Stephanie, before we went to break, we were talking about workplace mental health. What else can you add?
Yeah, so I was saying that it's kind of fallen to the wayside, which is it's quite strange to me because the impact of the pandemic hasn't changed. Yes, things are open and masks are no more, but that impact hasn't gone anywhere. So I don't blame workplaces because issues in the economy are so strong right now and people are worried about finances. I understand that. It's just, it really does a disservice to employees to kind of put mental health on to the side or on the back burner, or especially to understand that your employees need their mental health to excel at work. They need it to deal with what's happening in the economy, right? So it's kind of this strange dance that's been happening, I think, between employers and employees and what workplace mental health really means and where it needs to be on the priority list.
So, Stephanie, what would you tell managers and C-suite staff regarding workplace mental health right now?
I would say, again, from my lived experience and, reading and research as well, you don't know who's been through what. Some of your employees may be high functioning, they might be excelling, they might be fine in meetings, but you don't know what's going on behind the scenes. And that's very important to realize because I do think a lot of us don't bring it to the workplace. And there can be this perception that everyone's okay and we all have moved on, but in reality, that's not true. I think, too, I would emphasize to them to think about the trillions of scenarios that could have occurred during the pandemic. So that's anything from perhaps, your partner lost their job and now your finances are cut in half, or you live with an abusive partner and then you had to lock down with them, or your child was failing because they couldn't do online school. So we really have to understand that there are so many things that transpired and you're not going to be able to necessarily point out who struggled with what or who's struggling now. So it's kind of like this approach that you have to go in blind, assuming that, you don't know, and there could be people who are really struggling. I just want to add too, like it is really key to remember here that, I don't want to go to that extreme place, but when you're addressing mental health in the workplace, you don't know who is at the edge. You don't know who's in crisis. And you really have to think about that too, right? Because I do think at the end of the day, we're saving lives and that is a focus as well. I know that can seem daunting a lot, but it is something that's important to consider.
No, I mean, what you're saying is extremely important. We don't know what people go through behind closed doors. And as you said, there were a lot of women that were self-isolating with their harmers at home, with their abusers. And, they come to work every day and we have no idea what happens, when they go home. So what I want to talk about right now is what would you tell parents about supporting their children and their family?
Yeah, so there are a few key points I want to mention here. I found in my lived experience and in general, it's very difficult for someone who's never experienced mental illness to understand it. So, not being able to get out of bed, having very black and white thinking, all the cognitive distortions and all those issues, it's very hard for someone to grasp that if they haven't been through it. But I want to emphasize that you don't need to understand it completely to help someone. I think the key is providing unwavering support. It's also about validation. As I mentioned earlier with what, the younger generations are going through, it's about validation. They want to hear, everyone wants to hear that your experience is real, it happened, you're going through it, and I see you, right? And give them that. Because I do think that is a big part of how they're processing it, feeling supported as well, especially when they might not be getting that validation anywhere else, right? They have school, work, family. Where are you getting the validation that we understand what you're going through and we acknowledge that it has been hard. I think it's also important to empower people by saying, you made it through. Wherever they are right now, you made it through those 3 years. You have some resilience. And really, I think showing people that it wasn't just all the help they had or like surrounding, it was them. And I think that's very important because I think it empowers people with mental health issues to kind of keep going and know that, they have that strength.
So we're just getting ready to go to commercial break. And I think what I want to do is focus on you for the last segment. And I want to talk about what you've been through. I want to talk about what helped you the most, during high school and then during university, because you talked about high school and university during COVID lockdown. And then basically, I want to talk to you about, what you went through as a young professional as well, because these are your experiences. And I am so sure that there are a lot of young women out there or young people out there that are struggling the same. So please don't go away. Welcome back to Empowered. I'm Elizabeth Naumovski. Today's episode, we're discussing the current state of mental health and where do we go from here? I'm joined by Stephanie Jones, a facilitator, speaker, author, and founder of Jones Mental Health. Now, Stephanie, before we went to break, I really want to know, and I know that you're going to help a lot of people out there that are going through the same thing. What helped you the most during high school, university, and basically as a young professional?
Yeah, so when I look back, it was a very difficult experience. I can't emphasize that enough. And it's a very isolating experience, especially during the time that was early 2000s. We weren't talking about mental health at all, period. And I was very lucky in the sense that I had a very wide network. I had family members who worked in healthcare and understood how to navigate the system. My family is quite large. I was close with a lot of teachers. I had a lot of friends, just, different avenues and different sources. I think it's funny, and this has been used over and over, but not to pour from an empty cup. For myself, because I had so many cups, it wasn't like I was draining one person. I know it sounds strange, but you kind of have to have this network that's large. And that includes things like your GP, etc. So I was very lucky in that sense that I had so much support. And even then it was really difficult. So I kind of emphasize to people, you don't need to do this by yourself. Mental illness is not something you do alone. It is something where you have contact and it's not something that you need others to get through.
So I want to take it to the next level now and ask you, how has being a woman impacted your journey with mental illness?
I would say, I know we talked about mothers and juggling. I'm not a mother, but I do think as women, there's a lot of pressure to excel in all realms. Not just work, you have to look a certain way, you have to act a certain way, you can't be too much or too little or too aggressive, or you need to work twice as hard for certain jobs. If you're racialized, you have to work 3 times harder. There's just so much more that comes along with being a woman and so much pressure and so many things in life. But I will say, funny enough, being a woman has also helped me deal with things because women are encouraged to talk. We are, encouraged to have our community. We're encouraged to, have friends and have those connections. And I think as a woman, it was a bit easier for me because I could do that. When I think of men's mental health and what men have to go through, I feel very deeply for them, especially racialized groups, because the stigma is even heavier for men in those groups. But, we have a lot as women, but, there are strengths that have really helped me cope in the last few years and a couple decades, really.
Stephanie, how has being a Black woman impacted your journey with mental illness?
It's a big question.
I know, I'm sorry.
I could probably talk all night about that. But what I want to say is that I've seen various professionals, because of just the lack of structure in the mental health care system, just moving around, finding the right supports, short-term programs, it's very chaotic. And, I did have non-BIPOC therapists and support. And, they were very helpful, and some of them carried me through, very crucial times in my life. But I did find the ones who came from, racialized backgrounds, there was a different type of connection. There was that kind of layered understanding of culture and pressure and what we go through. So it's, as a Black woman, I'm not just looking at basic mental health. I'm looking at, how society treats Black women. I'm looking at expectations as a second generation Black woman, with West Indian parents. It's just so much more layered and so much more complicated. And I do think, looking back and now as an educated, because I have my Master of Social Work and I've done clinical work, I see and understand, all these modalities we have were really created by older Caucasian men.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. Now, Stephanie's goal is to fill the massive knowledge and experience gap between having and recognizing that you have mental health challenges and successfully getting the help that you need. Mental health is a huge topic to cover, and everyone's journey regarding their personal mental health is unique. Taking care of your mental well-being is just as important as taking care of your physical health. No matter who you are, make sure you take care of yourself before it's too late, because it truly is important. I'm Elizabeth Naumovski, and I'm here to empower you and make frugality fashionable. Bye for now.